Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If you can please take your seats. I hope you enjoyed the first day yesterday, the opening day of finished vehicle logistics North America. I think it was a great day. And as we said right at the beginning, it was, I think the whole event so far, as well as some great presentations and interesting discussions, it's certainly been a fun couple of days as well. Starting off with the golf, the whale watching, the cocktail reception hosted by Accelerated, and definitely, a fantastic dinner last night. Fun, great food, and great games around the dinner last night. It's hosted by Jack Cooper. But I hope you enjoyed the first day of the conferences as well, the sessions and discussions, because we've got a great day ahead of you now. A couple of small announcements. Firstly, for those of you who were whale watching or went to the golf, there's some pictures still there at the front desk. So if you want to have a memento of your golf day or the whale watches, there's some photos on the front desk. So please collect them. We've also got, you might have seen on the app, and there will be some paper evaluation forms for you to give your feedback. So obviously wait till the end of the conference, if you're here till the end, as you should be, to give us your feedback. But otherwise, before you leave, please give us your feedback, whether it's in paper form or on the app. Your feedback is very, very important to us, and we do take them very seriously. So please make sure you give us your feedback. And it's quite a fullish day. We've got a session now where we're looking forward at the transportation revolution. We'll be looking at networks, finished vehicle logistics networks in the session after the coffee, and the great finale, which is a panel session where we get some of the car makers and others into a final panel, so we can have an open Q&A on a variety of subjects, things that we've discussed today or the last days, or new topics that we never had a chance to cover. So please get involved in that as well. It is your session. One of the requests I get a lot as we travel around the world is, how do we get to meet or to talk to or question some of the top people in the industry? Well, that's what this session is for. So if you've got any questions, think about them and be prepared to ask them for the final session. And at the end of the final session, we'll be going over across the road, a very brief walk to the equipment showcase, which is just across the road, which you can go and see any time, whether it's the coffee breaks, whether it's the lunch, or wait till the end, where there'll be you'll have a chance to see the new equipment that's over there, as well as enjoy a few more refreshments. And what we'll be doing, and just to get us off started in a positive way, we're going to be doing a quick prize draw from all the delegates who attended the conference. Pick a card where you'll be given a box of the Queen's favourite biscuits. We got it wrong at a recent conference where we misunderstood, and we bought the Queen's corgis, her dog's favourite biscuits. We didn't go quite as well for most of the audience, but in the inbound logistics conference, they actually really loved them. So there's a different kind of audience that we get at the different conferences. So we'll just do a quick draw. Joseph Skinner from CP Rail. Is Joseph here? Oh, good. Okay. So we'll bring over the biscuits, and hope you enjoy them. Dip them into some fine English breakfast tea, and that way you might remember us as the organisers. And a couple of things I wanted to do before the start of the conference, before the start of the session as well. I think, we started off yesterday by getting everybody to stand up and then do something. So this time I'm going to do something similar. So if everybody can please stand up just for a couple of minutes. Okay, and that's it really. I just want to make sure you were capable of standing up this morning. That was the main reason for that. But his speed of standing up is anything to go by, then this is going to be a tough morning. But we've got a very interesting session where we're looking forward. It's, we've kind of moved away from the providers or even the car makers or vehicle makers to give you an idea of how the industry is going to change. So what we'd like, so looking a bit forward, looking at technology, looking at ideas, looking how the industry is going to change. And talking about technology, I would remind you about our app, the Finished Vehicle Logistics Live app. So make sure that you've anyone who's new, is only joining on the second day, make sure you log on to the app so you can really be part of the whole discussions. Strangely enough, and it's not something I particularly want to encourage, but we were getting more questions on the app in the final session than we were getting in the room. I would still prefer the answers to be in the room because it's more engaging, but if the questions come from the app, then that's fine as well. So please make sure you register, log on to the app and be part of the whole experience. But to start off this session on transportation revolutions, a company that's kind of often at the leading edge of technical revolutions, I'd like to welcome to the podium the first speaker of the day, Senthil Virtachalam, who's the Senior Managing Consultant for Strategy and Transportation from IBM. Thank you, Senthil.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Senthil Virtachalam. I've been with IBM for about 10 years now. Before IBM, I used to work for the automotive companies, both OEMs as well as on tier 1 supplier, so which helps me to get a lot of real-time perspective on what automotive is from when I'm doing this consulting. And I'm in a global role, spend a lot of time with both OEMs and tier 1 suppliers across the globe. And one of my key objectives is to help them realize where the industry is going towards, right? Like in terms of what are the leading technologies and practices that's kind of evolving, either in automotive or in other industries. How do we leverage that? Is there a way that we could leverage those technologies in automotive? And if so, how? So we help them to connect the dot between where the technology is and how they could use it. So that is my key role in my current job. So with that, I would like to go into today's topic. This is the reason why we picked global trade is I have a short video towards the end that kind of is kind of a case study that comes back to the same topic. Because this is where we, from an external perspective, we see there is a lot of value that a new technology could add, not only to reduce cost, also to improve the efficiency significantly. So if you look at, actually there's a lot of numbers on the slide, but the key thing here is, see when there is a global trade, when things get moved from one country to another, when you cross the borders, different modes of transportation, there's a lot of documentation that goes with it. And as per our studies, we figured out that it's going to be like almost 20% of your transportation cost. So obviously it cannot be completely avoided, but how a technology could help to reduce it, like that is like a lot of money. So that is where our efforts and focus were these days. So obviously, so getting into what this means to automotive, right? Especially from a finished vehicle logistics standpoint. I know that I'm speaking to the choir, so you guys know what the complexity is in terms of how many players are involved, from a OEM, supplier, and all those guys in between. But what is the key challenges, right? There's a lot of challenges, but what are key challenges that from a technology-wise that we are after, or we believe that we could help from a technology-wise? So obviously one is about the information, right? The data that you get. How much of this is accurate? How much of error is being built into the data? That's one aspect. The another one is about the inconsistency, right? So the inconsistency in the data itself, and also the timestamp that goes with the data, right? So you may be talking to one of your supply chain player, and you may get a data, but it is probably a week or 2 weeks old. So what is the relevance in terms of the information itself. And then there's a lot of border delays. And then the bigger aspect to all of this is the visibility. The lot of question that always keep asked is, where is my vehicle, right? Like, where is my vehicle? Where is my shipment? How do I track it? And also, when the two big problems that we have been keep on hearing from a lot of this leadership teams is about the damage, how to manage this damage that's happening on the vehicle, and how I can be proactive, or when a damage happens, that how I can be more proactive from a standpoint that to fix those repairs so that it doesn't impact my delivery time. So visibility on that. So for that, it's not only just the shipping and stuff, it's also relies on the external factors like weather and other aspects that you need to build in. So that's where another visibility comes in. Then the whole management, right? Like, whole management from a standpoint of, I have my yard, my shipper, and then I have these vehicles that goes inside it. How do I track in relationship between both of them? So that is a very key, so that I move my point of the fixed date all the way towards the end, so that even during shipping, I can try to do my analysis and figure out which needs to be routed where to make sure that all these high prioritized things can be addressed. So that's another area. So in terms of root cause to address those challenges, the biggest factor is there is no single source of truth, right? Everybody has their own perspective. When I say everybody, means everybody in this ecosystem has their own perspective and their own interest on what the data means. So they all have the pieces of the puzzle. But how does all these pieces of puzzle comes together, right? So the single source of truth kind of relies in a puzzle in many different players, right? That is key. And then the time, is it real time, or is it like how old is it? So the realness to the time factor. And then all this information is being maintained, stored in their own systems, and obviously there is their own processes everybody follows, which also pretty much defines what kind of data formats and stuff that they use. So the bottom line is, yeah, it's all there, all the information is there, but it is not in a usable way where somebody can go just pull all those things together and make sense out of it. Yeah, it is possible, but it's a huge manual effort of doing all of that. Even if you do it, it is like a one-time thing, and then you have to redo it again for every single time when you need it. So that's where it is. So you probably heard or pretty much heard about this blockchain a lot, and there is also a side track about the Bitcoin, that whether it helps or not, but it made the blockchain popular across the globe. Now everybody knows about blockchain now, at least the term blockchain. So that's one of the key things that I want to talk about today, how it enables our logistics. So when it talks about blockchain is nothing but a ledger, right? It is a distributed ledger. So you have a ledger. So if there is, say, like 5 parties that is involved in this complete ecosystem. So, and instead of and blockchain is nothing but having a common ledger among this controlled 5 player. That is where the blockchain that we are proposing is kind of different than what you hear from the media. For example, Bitcoin and stuff is different, right? See, blockchain is just a concept, and then there's a lot of solutions that you can be derived out of that concept. One such concept was the Bitcoin stuff. The another solution that we derive is called a hyperledger based blockchain. That is what we propose for the enterprise applications. The reason is, this is a controlled environment. You control how many players can be in the ecosystem. You control in terms of who can see what kind of information within that platform. So you have a tight control on the network that kind of plays together, or the network that kind of have access to that ledger, or what gets into the ledger. So that's the key thing about the blockchain. The another important stuff is, it's not an idea of replacing what you have, right? The 5 player in the ecosystem, they all have their own processes, their system. This is the technology kind of brings those dots together. It's not going to replace anything. It's probably an API. It's like a small API that kind of sits in each of those systems. and you define the rule of how this API will be used in those in their system. What needs to be triggered if there is a transaction that happens in their system, it kind of pulls it and then puts it into the ledger. And when I say ledger means we have carefully chosen the word ledger because it's a one-time thing, right? When you write something on a ledger, it's a hard stoned one. You cannot erase it. So that creates the trust among the parties that once it gets in, it is in. So it gives a clear visibility of what it is. So the blockchain, right? So this is just a ledger. But how do I get to a ledger, right? How do I get the information to a ledger with the APIs and stuff? Systems can be connected, but how do I bring the other parts of the information to the ledger is where the IoT concept comes in, right? So it's called Internet of Things, where you can get data from your vehicle or the weather data. You can bring a lot of this data and bring it into the ledger itself. Initially there was a pitch only about blockchain, but the blockchain value can be really realized when you build this IoT and blockchain together as a one big piece, because each has their own merits. The IoT is where the real-time information factor comes in, right? So I have a ledger, but to make it more real-time and more current, IoT is an enabler for that. So that's how these two pieces kind of brings the story for blockchain, for logistics. And obviously from a benefit standpoint, so every player, right, in this value chain is going to be benefited. There's a lot of players that is not in the slide. For example, your insurer, the guys who finance your shipping, everybody will be benefited. And one of the use cases that we are talking about recently is about from a damage management standpoint itself, right? So when I have a damage management, first of all, how do I track using this IoT and blockchain concept? Instead of saying, hey, I have so many inspections that is being performed, and how do I monitor, how do I track that closely and then see where exactly it happened? And it's not only just happening in silo, you kind of make that visible to everybody, to your insurance, to your financial, everybody kind of aware of where that thing happened, so that when you process your claims, it kind of happens fast, and it kind of does the entire closed loop completely. And that kind of reduces, that improves the efficiency to the customer that we are talking about right now. That is their key challenge, and we are trying to enable blockchain in that aspect. So that is in summary. There is a video that I'm going to, so the case study, right? So this is what I want to talk about. The reason why we picked this is obviously it's a fact that there's a lot of goods, more than 90% of the trade is happening through ocean, right? So IBM and Merck, we partnered together, and this area is focused on the border crossing aspect itself, how we can enable blockchain so that all the paperwork, the documentation that goes with it can be enabled, so that it has the clear traceability in terms of end-to-end traceability, and it provides visibility to all the players and makes this process more efficient. So we did it's a real case study, and it is publicly available. And if you guys want to talk about it, I'm available to go into the details. But I would like to play the video because we did a publishing, and I'd like to play that video of what this case study is.
The following is a demonstration of how IBM and Maersk are partnering to digitize and simplify global trade using blockchain to create trust and transparency in the supply chain. Global trade functions much as it has since the introduction of the shipping container in 1956. Manual paper-based processes are still common, and information about the status of goods is locked away in organizational silos. Today, 90% of goods in global trade are carried by the shipping industry, with the supply chain slowed by the complexity and sheer volume of point-to-point communication across a loosely coupled web of land transportation providers, freight forwarders, customs brokers, governments, ports, and ocean carriers. Processing the documents and information for a container shipment is estimated to cost more than twice that of the actual physical transportation. IBM and Maersk are addressing this problem with a distributed, permission platform accessible by the supply chain ecosystem designed to exchange event data and handle document workflows. Maersk and IBM are employing blockchain technology to create a global, tamper-proof system for digitizing trade workflow and tracking shipments end-to-end, eliminating frictions including costly point-to-point communications. The collaboration will launch with the potential ability to track millions of container journeys per year and integrate with customs authorities on selected trade lanes. In a recent test by Maersk, shipping a single container of flowers from Kenya to the port of Rotterdam resulted in a stack of nearly 200 communications. Using this example, we will examine how blockchain has been implemented to create trust and security in the digitized document workflow and improve the efficiency of global supply chains. Here we can see each distinct entity involved in the transaction: the growers, export authorities, ports, customs, and importers. Shipping from the port of Mombasa requires signatures from 3 different agencies approving the export and 6 documents that describe the origin, chemical treatments, quality of the produce, and customs duties. Firstly, using a PC or mobile device, the Kenyan farm submits a packing list that becomes visible to all participants. This action initiates a smart contract that enforces an export approval workflow between the 3 agencies. As each agency signs, the status is updated for all to see. Simultaneously, information about the inspection of the flowers, the sealing of the refrigerated container, the pickup by the trucker, and the approval from customs is communicated to the port of Mombasa, allowing them to prepare for the container. All actions relating to the documents and the physical goods are captured and shared: which documents were submitted, when and by whom, where the flowers are and who is in possession of them, and the next steps in their journey. Flowers are perishable, so it's crucial that there are no delays or missteps. Blockchain provides secure data exchange and a tamper-proof repository for these documents and shipping events. This system could significantly reduce delays and fraud, saving billions of dollars annually. And according to the WTO, reducing barriers within the international supply chain could increase worldwide GDP by almost 5% and total trade volume by 15%. For more information on how IBM can help make blockchain right for your business, please visit ibm.com/blockchain.
Yeah. So the point here is this one is being done for a non-automotive applications, but the concept is it's still relevant for automotive, and so that's how we are progressing now with most of our clients. Thank you.
Thank you very much. An interesting presentation and something I've been trying to understand myself, this blockchain stuff. I can see how important it's going to be, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions after. Nimish, who most of you know, who put the program together, asked me, tried to explain it to me a bit more simply. He said there was a famous case of explaining blockchains using donuts. So we tried to have a meeting around that, but you can imagine it all went wrong when I ate the donuts. So I'm still trying to learn to understand the system more. But next up, I'd like to welcome Tim Pickering from the Office of Marine Highways and Passenger Services, the Maritime Administration of the US, from the Department of Transport. Thank you, Tim.
Okay. Well, I wish I'd known I could show videos. That would have really cut back on my presentation time. Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation to speak. One thing about the Office of Marine Highways and Passenger Services, by the way, is gone. We are now the Office of Ports and Waterways Development. So we thought that it more accurately reflects what we do. So the one thing I like about working for the Maritime Administration, it's not a regulatory agency. There's a very small portion of my office that does offshore port licensing. But aside from that, we do defense and we do maritime advocacy. So when I say I'm from Washington, I'm here to help, it's actually a true statement. So, all right. This is the vision and the mission statement. We're trying to better integrate the maritime system into the overall intermodal logistics chain. Particularly the ports and waterways, the inland ports, the use of container on barge, those sorts of things. That's what my office has actually stood up for, was to move freight to a viable third option besides rail and road. And we're having some successes in that area so far. The National Maritime Strategy. Our last administrator, when he came in, he noted that the last time the Maritime Strategy had been updated was 1936. So a few changes have occurred since then. Computers, containers, ro-ro ships, flags of convenience. So he took it upon himself to rewrite the National Maritime Strategy. Unfortunately, it was a very good document. It was staffed throughout DOT and Department of Defense and other agencies within the government, and it made it to the 2-yard line, and then the administration changed. So it's going back through review. Fortunately, the document is largely done. It's more tweaking and changing some things to the substance of the new administration, but we don't suspect it's going to be huge changes. So we hope to get this back before the Office of Management and Budget for review and then ultimately release. So the 5 pillars that are listed there, we don't think they're going to change. Just some details about how they're going to be implemented. The 3 that are highlighted are the ones that are directly impacted by my office. So we work on ports, domestic shipping, and innovation. The MARAD Gateway offices. Now these are your kind of your local representatives. We've got 10 gateways that were established in 2008. They provide assistance to ports and waterway stakeholders on the various coasts and the inland waterways and the Great Lakes. They serve on maritime committees in their regions, port security committees, things like that. But they also act as the local conduit for you to get to the federal aid and the assistance from Washington. Now this is a program that I have to admit I don't know as much about as I need to, but every time I go speak on the inland waterways in particular, and I talk about port conveyance, I do it as like a little throwaway slide, and then that's where all my questions come at the end. This program transfers federal land to states, local governments at no cost, in perpetuity. So as long as the port facility or the land is being used to support the port, whether it's a tank farm, a container yard, a transit shed, or an actual a pier, it's yours until if you decided to use it for something else, then I guess it would revert back to the government if you were done with it. The process is that the porter would apply to MARAD for the property. MARAD reviews, consults with the agency that currently holds it. They transfer title to MARAD, and MARAD transfers title over to the port. And then MARAD is responsible for oversight to ensure that it's actually being used for the intended purposes. This shows what we've done so far. In just these few years, we've transferred 2,800 acres of property to 13 states and local entities. I'm not going to go through and read them all, but of interest in this particular area, we've transferred nearly 460 acres to the LA Long Beach area from the old naval bases here. So you can imagine the value of that property in this area. We found some on the inland waterways in particular that the M. Carnes waterway, which is a canal cut into the Arkansas River network, and the river used to go like this, and they essentially cut straight through. And all those switchbacks, they're not navigable, but there's sufficient water there for them to store barges. And they've got, all that land is owned by the Corps of Engineers. And so as soon as I start mentioning this, that's the first thing people start thinking about. And so hopefully this program will expand and we can transfer additional properties in the future. Okay. I think that's just what I went over. And did I go backwards? There we go. See, I'm red-green colorblind. They gave me a red and green button here. So I told you I was going to do that at some point. So this is actually my office. And our vision, long-term vision, is to have a connected integrated system of reliable, regular scheduled marine and highway services that are a modal choice. We get cross-eyed looks from our counterparts at Federal Highway and Rail when we say we're here to take freight away from them, but we're just here to hopefully develop the marine highway system to the point that it's actually a choice, a routine choice for shippers. Now this problem everybody's well aware of. We've got expanded trade for the canal is changing trade patterns. We're already congested. Congestion is increasing. I think we've seen recently some ships have pulled in and loaded and offloaded. I think the most I've seen was somewhere around 20,000 containers in a 24-hour period. And if you can imagine the backlog that occurs when that suddenly hits the roads and the rail right there. And our road and rail networks are near capacity, and expansion is limited and would take a long time. The U.S. moves about 6% of its freight by water once it's inside the U.S., as opposed to 40% in Europe. We've tried to, our first plan when we did this, was to emulate the European model, but the geography doesn't work in our favor. And what we found is that rather than the focus of this program when it was first envisioned 20 years ago was large railroads moving up and down the east and west coasts that would also be available to augment the defense needs and sort of emulate what's happening in Europe. But what we found here is that our most successful are less than 100 miles using barges, using existing infrastructure, and keeping the costs low. So we've got 29,000 miles of coastal and inland waterways, and you see the map in the lower corner there that showed the marine highway system. This shows the United States at night. I'm sure you've seen variations of this. With the exception of Tucson, Denver, and Dallas, all of our major cities are on navigable waterways. And if you connect the dots, you could draw the U.S. river network in the center. Of course, the Mississippi River basin covers 31 states. So, and that's where most of our success, other than in the Northeast, with the Marine Highway Program has been seen. Okay. And there's the map, bigger version of it. The marine highway routes are numbered in accordance with the interstate system. So the M5 follows the I-5 roughly. The M95 follows the 95, and the Mississippi is the M55. We've got 24 all-water routes now that are designated by the Secretary of Transportation. We have one request pending. The state of Hawaii has requested that the H1, which is their interstate, well, they don't have an interstate, I guess. Their highway is called the H1. They've asked for designation as the MH1. And that is currently with the Secretary for her review and approval. Federal aid opportunities. Now this, again, things are changing. We've got the new administration. Whether Tiger's going to get the Tiger Grant program is going to get renewed or not is anybody's guess. The fast lane is now infra, which changing the name, the same basic program. But the things that are currently available are service transportation block grants, the infra grants, CMAQ money for air quality and congestion, the National Freight Highway Program, and then the Advanced Transportation Congestion Management Technologies. It's a long one. We call it ATCMD. Okay. We also have the Marine Highway Grant Program, which is my office. This program was first funded in 2010. The program at that point was not very well defined. The rules were not well laid out, and I don't think they had the goals quite down. And trying to be critical of them, but it was a new organization. They started from scratch, And before they could really get their feet on the ground, the government gave them $7 million and said, go grant this money. Half of the money came back unused. It went to programs that were never going to get off the ground. And the rest of it, the money was spent on infrastructure and equipment that still exists. It's not being used that was originally intended. So I think we were slapped around for the failure to execute. So for 5 years, we didn't get any money. And then in 2016, which is just about the time I arrived, we received our $5 million grant, which for us to execute. So at that point, we received 10 applications. 8 were eligible, and of the 8, 6 received nearly everything that they asked for. Let's see, let me get a hit on here. I think I'm on the wrong. I think I hit the wrong button here and went past this somewhere. Oh well, I'll just pick it up. So for the current grant program, we received another $5 million, and those applications are currently under review. Okay. There we go. Fast Act. I think these slides are out of order from the ones I've got here. Okay, well, let's just press on. The FAST Act has created the infra program and the National Highway Freight Program, and requires that the states each have a state freight plan in order to be eligible for certain monies. One of the benefits of that is that many of the states are now creating maritime divisions that they had not had in the past. Okay. All right. And the one big item here is the bottom. Up to 10% of the funding is allocated to each state can be used for eligible port projects within the port gates. That's a huge change. That did not exist before. Everything road and rail stopped at the gate. The Maritime Administration was finally able to convince the powers that be that the road and rail infrastructure inside the gate was also a critical item. Okay, so the freight plans. These I think we've received 46 of the 50 so far. There's a few that are past due. They have to cover a 5-year period, be fiscally constrained, include a freight investment plan, and describe how the states will invest and match its Federal Highway freight plan money. Some of the eligible uses. The big ones here, I think, for us, we're seeing the railway highway grade separations, the intelligent transportation systems, truck parking, and reducing the environmental impact of freight movements. Okay, now there's the slide I was looking for earlier. So this is what I was speaking about earlier. The $5 million, you can see where the money was invested. That money went for planning grants for 2 of those. The other went for mostly equipment upgrades. We actually got a crane training simulator in the New York area. They were using the gantry crane operators to load barges, which do not have cell guides, and so it was a very slow process. We were able to convince the secretary that a crane training simulator was infrastructure and that this would help improve throughput. The crane training simulator has been open since, I believe, October, and so we're hoping to see some improvements in throughput over the next year or so. Okay, strong ports. This is my sister program. I run the marine highways, and the other portion of ours is the ports and the waterways. So this is the ports section of it. looking at this diagram here, I was at the Maritime Transportation System National Advisory Committee a couple weeks ago, and they mentioned there were 31 agencies that touch water in the United States, at various levels, including the transportation sector. Of those, 18 actually impact ports. Excuse me. So this shows the ocean passage that's under the Coast Guard. Navigable waterways is the Corps of Engineers for dredging. Of course, the intermodal transfer is the port authorities and the terminal operators. You've got rail, road, pipelines, and all those things. But there's no one that's trying to look at this from a holistic approach, looking at the entire thing until the Maritime Administration stood up the Office of Ports and Waterways. So again, we're not a regulatory agency, so we're able to look at this and aid and also help with the outreach to these other agencies as needed. Most of them are in the building with us, and hope to, the MITSNEC has some interesting ideas on this as well to better use the Department of Transportation and the Maritime Administration to further control, including the funding aspects of this. So we would have a single agency looking at this and having more of a say as to where the money is going to be spent to assist in the movement of freight. Current freight needs. The American Association of Port Authorities identified $29 billion roughly in port-related projects. And as you see, the amount of money that we have to support that is a fraction. There was $578 million with the matches and such coming to $1.7 billion, and then the five fast lane grants totaling $115 million. So we're just scratching the surface of the requirements. So the Office of Ports and Waterway, or the Office of Strong Ports, rather, I'm sorry, shows where what they do is they work with the planning and engagement financing. We have a port finance agent who came from the private sector and knows very well how the money works inside and outside the government. So we assist, or my fellow program assists in the planning, engagement, finance, and then project support. They've developed a planning and investment toolkit with a cooperative agreement with the AEPA, and there were hard copies of it. I think it's still, those are mostly given out. It's available online now. They do community planning. They do port talks. We go out to the regions. We take a team from the headquarters. We meet with the port officials, the shippers in the area, maritime operators of various stripes, and the politicals from that region, and we discuss what we can do and how we can bring federal aid to bear. We also do project support. We've got some huge programs going on in Hawaii and Guam at the moment. Okay. There's the Strong Ports Port Planning and Investment Toolkit that I'd talked about earlier. It's a collection of best practices, and it was developed by industry experts, and it's available for download at the Strong Ports website, which I'll bring up at the end of this. The port talks, those are the things we do where we go out and we do a regional collaboration. And the Build America Bureau. They took the various credit programs that were existing within the department, and they stood up what used to be called BOTIC. I'm not sure I don't remember what that stood for, but it was given a better name as the Build America Bureau. They took the TIFIA, RIF, and Fast Lane programs and put them under there. There's also some shipbuilding credit programs that are likely to move under this organization in the near future. And this is continuing to grow. And as they better learn how to navigate the waters of the various modes within the Department of Transportation, I think is going to continue to grow and be more successful. Lastly, the ITS JPO office. This is where they've taken the various intelligent transportation programs within the Federal Rail, Highway, FAA, Maritime Administration, and the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Agency. And we're trying to collaborate so that we're not working at odds with each other, and we're getting best practices among the various programs. The program is seeking to develop a research plan and portfolio of ITS projects that will improve the performance of maritime ports and terminals and further integrate ports into the larger U.S. transportation system. The 5-year vision is to advance the use of ITS technologies within the maritime and freight transportation industries, and then by identifying the ITS solutions that can meet the operational needs of these industries. The ITS MARAD program will further the mobility, environmental sustainability, and economic competitiveness goals of the U.S. DOT and benefit the entire transportation system. And those are the websites for the offices that I mentioned earlier. I apologize for the red, green, and the slides. I think I may have sent an earlier version here, and I think I might have made a few changes. I had a few slides out of order, but so I apologize for stumbling on those. I'll be here for a few minutes after this during the break, but I've got a flight, so I've got to leave soon. But if anybody wants to talk to me about anything after this, I'll make myself available. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A good, comprehensive idea of what the government's doing, or rather what MARAD are doing to support and develop the port and ocean infrastructure to support logistics. So thank you very much for that. Next up, I'd like to welcome to the podium Jason Keane, Vice President of Oliver Wyman. Thank you, Jason.
Good morning, and I want to thank Louis and Nemish for inviting me here to speak, and I also want to thank Catherine for gathering all the presentations, coordinating them, and getting them up here for us to give. Thank you very much. The first thing I want to talk about today, I'm a rail person. I'm part of the rail practice at Oliver Wyman, but we have a bunch of different practices. We have an automotive practice, we have health and life sciences, banking, energy, big aviation practice, all that kind of stuff. But I'm a specialist in the rail practice, so one of the things they asked me to present was some discussion of where rail service is going. And I don't have really great news here, but if you look at these charts, what I have is the 2 Western carriers stacked, and then the 2 Eastern carriers stacked, and then I have another slide following this with the 2 Canadian carriers, and then Kansas City Southern. The white line is average train speed. Ideally, you'd like that line to be going up. And the orange line is average terminal dwell time, and ideally, you'd like that number, or that line, to be trending downward. We don't have a publicly available metric on shipment reliability or compliance with trip plans. These are really the only 2 metrics that are publicly available and collected on a weekly basis by the Association of American Railroads and the STB. As you can see, BNSF has been pretty stable over time. Union Pacific has been trending slightly downward on average train speed and slightly upward on average terminal dwell time. CSX is going the right direction, kind of the kind of graph that you'd like to see, with the train speed going up and the average terminal dwell time tending to trend down. Norfolk Southern, on the other hand, tends to be going the wrong way right now. Over the last 6 months, their average train speed has declined and their average terminal dwell time has increased, including a pretty significant spike towards the beginning of the fourth quarter of last year. On the Canadian side, also Canadian National, I think you've heard, have had a lot of congestion issues with, they had the strongest traffic growth of any of the Class 1s in 2017, but it slowed their network down considerably. Their average train speed has declined, and their average terminal dwell time has increased dramatically. Canadian Pacific has had similar issues, but not on the same magnitude of scale as CN has had. And Kansas City Southern has been fairly flat, very slight decline in average train speed, and pretty much pretty stable with a few hiccups here and there on terminal dwell time. Now what I'd like to do is, Oliver Wyman has done a considerable amount of work, particularly in our European offices, on mobility and the impact of mobility on different areas of supply chain expenses and investment in that area. We have a number of very detailed studies, over 100 slides, so I couldn't possibly present all of that material. And we have a journal called Velocity that's printed once yearly. It's kind of our transportation and logistics journal. And so some of these have been summarized with 3- and 4-page articles in the Velocity journal. I would be happy to email some of these materials out to people if you give me your card after the presentation. But I cherry-picked a few slides that I thought were most relevant to finished vehicle logistics and the demand for finished vehicles, and we'll review those quickly. First off, as everybody knows, the race to autonomy is on, and it's going to have very wide-ranging impacts through a lot of different industries. Supply chain is just one of them. Self-flying taxis are being tested in Dubai last year. Autopilot level 4 is becoming available on Tesla vehicles. Daimler is doing self-driving trucks and continuing to try to go towards commercialization of that system. It's expected about 2020. Autonomous taxi fleets by Lyft and Uber, no big surprise there, are expected around 2021. Rolls-Royce has been working, and I haven't heard much talk about this at the conference, but on autonomous ships ready for sea. I think that could have a big impact on a lot of finished vehicle logistics movements. Hyperloop in Dubai is forecast to be completed. It's a small system of about 160 kilometers compared to what's been proposed in the US, but it's supposed to actually be completed in 2022. We'll see if it happens. Swarm bots to replace tractors. We'll see. That seems a little far-fetched to me in 2023. And then everybody's, I think, pretty well aware of Amazon and wanting to do prime air delivery of parcels in the last mile, and that's expected about 2025. Autonomous vehicle development will greatly accelerate over the next decade. As you can see, the dotted line is where we are now. There's been an awful lot of work on drones. That's probably the leading area so far, but ground is going to catch up and surpass drones in the next decade or so, with a lot of work on cars initially, but I think a lot of the focus now, and there's been a real realization in the industry that the money is where logistics is, much more so than trying to get personal drivers and stuff to pay a big premium for a self-driving car. They don't value their own time in the car to the same extent that you tend to commercially value time of a truck driver, and you have driver shortages in the trucking industry. And then there's a lot of less reported, but a lot of work going on in the sea area and a little bit going on in the undersea area with remote submarines and things like that. The supply chain is going to become very autonomous. A lot of these things we've already seen in the automotive business with autonomous robots in factories, robots moving merchandise around to the assembly line, things like that, autonomous facility surveillance in some areas. Autonomous transportation is probably the next big thing that will happen. And I was very sad to see, but I've also kind of corresponds with what I've heard in this conference this year. I don't see trains on here anywhere. It's a big missing area. If you can do something like a truck or a ship that has no fixed guideway, why the heck can't you do a train? But there's absolutely no talk in North America really of a driverless train. We just, with the change of administration, actually escaped a regulation that was being proposed to require 2 people in the cab of every freight train. Even though most of our passenger trains, which have the, I would say, the most valuable cargo, tend to have just 1 person in the cab of them. You're seeing a lot of autonomous vehicles starting to happen and be tested in terminal areas and ports. Warehouse management, I don't know, that might work for the aftermarket stuff in the automotive business. Drone delivery to the customer door, I don't think you'll see that in the automotive. I can't imagine picking up a finished vehicle with a drone and delivering it. On the other hand, probably the analogy to that is a self-driving car. Just delivering itself right to the customer's door once it gets off the truck or rail car that delivers it into the local area. One of the things that I think has a lot of promise in the supply chain, I don't think we're quite there yet, are level 3 autonomy with vehicles, and I could see those vehicles being able to load and unload themselves, particularly from a rail car, which is fairly straightforward. We had a lot of discussion in the autonomous panel yesterday, and there's a lot of less enthusiasm about it in trucking because of the difficulty in getting the vehicles loaded properly on a truck in the right order and the tilted angles and stuff that they have to be in. But most rail cars are pretty straight, drive on, park the car and go. If we could come up with a mechanized way of tying down the vehicle as well once it's in the rail car, it would be, I think, pretty simple to run the terminals and get the vehicles on and off the rail car. And then lastly, fully autonomous vehicles could potentially deliver themselves right from the truck or rail staging ramp directly to customers rather than going through a dealership. The impact on the demand for finished vehicles is also, I think, important, widely discussed. I don't know that there's a real consensus on this yet, but there certainly are a lot of potential benefits from autonomous cars, which give them a lot of incentive to be developed. Drop-in car accidents is probably the single biggest one, accounting for almost half of the potential benefits of autonomous vehicles, with about 300,000 lives saved per year. This is globally. All these numbers are global. They're not just in the United States. Productivity gains, another $2 billion, with a gain of about 51 minutes per day per user. Think of what you do on your commute. Unless you're taking public transportation, that time's pretty much wasted. People are trying real hard to text and talk on the phone and stuff when they drive, but that just drives up the accident rate in number one. So you could get both with autonomous vehicles. Congestion savings, I'm a little more not convinced of this one as much. Latest word out of New York City is that Uber and Lyft have actually increased congestion in New York City, not reduced it. And then fuel savings, I think there's generally regarded that autonomous vehicles are going to drive more smoothly and consistently than human driven vehicles and have a significant fuel savings advantage. There's a belief that autonomy will accelerate a modal switch away from public transport to cars across all geographies. I think we need to be very careful of this, but in our mobility study, we've taken 5 sample countries, including the USA at the bottom, and somewhere around 39% of people think it's likely or very likely that they would switch from public transport into some sort of an autonomous vehicle. That's lower response than most of the rest of the world. You'll notice China is up there at 83%. I think that's probably because we're a very automobile-oriented society in the United States, particularly in rural areas and in the South, and so there may not be as much public transport to shift away from as there are in other geographies. The willingness to switch from public transportation to autonomous cars seems to be pretty consistent across most income levels, except at the low income level, which kind of surprised me. But if you look at the not sure segment, that's really what blows up the low income level, and I think it's primarily lower income levels seem to have the greatest uncertainty about change and the impact on them, and thus have indicated less of a propensity to change from public transit to autonomous vehicles. Now, market share, but I want to warn you, not necessarily the absolute amount of mobility spend on private cars could drop significantly in the next 25 years. Right now, the spend is about 75% on private cars, about 4% on mobility services, and then bus, rail, air, kind of public transportation is 22%. We see a little increase in bus, rail and air, but we see a really big increase from about 4% to 20% happening in the next 25 years in mobility services, and we see the private car share dropping from 55%. But if you look at the size of the pie is expected to also grow significantly over the next 25 years. So I would say it's not a clear conclusion that there will be a reduction in finished vehicle demand, but there will certainly be a big shift in the amount of spend going to mobility services and away from private car ownership. What will happen in the United States, this is my prognostication. I think you'll see a lot of autonomous vehicle mobility start from the south and move north. And there's really just one fairly simple reason for this, and that's there's no snow in the south. And one of the biggest hurdles to autonomous transportation is if the road's covered in snow and you can't see the lane lines and things like that, you have a big problem. So the farther north you go and the higher snow areas you go, the more the difficulty is. You'll see this also, an awful lot of the autonomous truck development and testing right now is going on in Nevada, Southern California, across the I-10 corridor. Interestingly, no snow there. So it's one of the easiest places to test emerging technology. There's a few large cities in the South, particularly Atlanta, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Los Angeles, that have some sort of fixed guideway transit system in addition to bus. And I think that will be a really good test as we watch what happens in the South and what really the impact is on public transit. I would expect that the bus systems will be heavily impacted and replaced by autonomous vehicles. I'm not convinced, after having worked the last 6 months of last year in Atlanta, that it would be very easy to replace MARTA with autonomous vehicles, because that highway through the middle of downtown Atlanta is one of the most congested I have ever seen at just about any hour of the day, and I can't imagine throwing a whole lot more cars on that lane, even if they are autonomous, a little more densely packed and things. I just don't think the infrastructure is there or could be built to accommodate that. And I think that's the problem you see up in New York City and places like that as well. I think you'll see it in Seattle. I think you'll see it in a lot of the major urban areas. So I'm not convinced that autonomous vehicles will replace rail or fixed guideway transportation, but I think they will have an impact on the bus network. Now, the big picture of autonomy is really the total spend is expected to grow to about $3.65 billion worldwide, but only about a little less than a quarter of that is actually going to be what I call the hardware side, the the autonomous vehicles, autonomous trucks, autonomous trains, buses, ships, planes, that kind of thing. There's a huge amount of spend that's going to happen on service systems and data. If you think about it, when you're going to be in an autonomous vehicle, you're going to be online and you're going to be playing on the internet or doing work or things like that. And so that kind of, it's going to be like having cable TV and Netflix in your house. Fleet and infrastructure is going to be a big chunk of spend, and MRO and aftermarket support is going to increase because the vehicles and hardware are going to get more complex from software and things like that, not as much from drivetrains. So of that 22%, this is what we expect the spend to be broken out by ground, mostly civilian vehicles and trucks, a little bit on manufacturing, and some on military. Total autonomy in ground will only rise to about 16%. So even with that big a spend, of course, ground transportation is the biggest area that we invest in right now for infrastructure and vehicles. Rail is going to be about 24% automated, most of that on the passenger side, and I think on freight rail you're going to see more of it outside of the United States than inside, unfortunately. I think partly due to the strong unions governing rail freight. In Europe, you have Alstom working on the Bedouin corridor, which is from Rotterdam into Germany. They're working on driverless trains in that corridor. Australia has a project with Rio Tinto out in the Pilbara region to automate trains because they just have such a difficult time attracting locomotive engineers that want to be out there in the middle of nowhere in Australia for weeks on end. So they're actually actively testing their system now. They haven't turned it on fully yet. Air will be about 21% automated, a lot of focus on drone delivery and cargo aircraft and military, a lot less on passengers. I think a lot of people are still a little scared of getting into a plane with no cockpit crew. And then you'll see sea become about 29% automated by 2030, and a big focus on the civilian sector there, tankers, container ships, and vessel carriers, and a tiny amount of space investment. I want to leave you with one quote. It's going to be ever more important in this rapidly changing world and with autonomous transportation coming on board to develop an agile organization. One of the things that came out of our panel yesterday that I thought was interesting is that autonomous vehicles will actually be a big contributor to the ability to get rid of the dealership network in the distribution of finished vehicles. And if you look at what Tesla's doing, they don't even use a dealership network. They're probably the farthest along on building into their cars an autonomous level of transportation. Maybe they'll be the first, but if you look at what Amazon does, maybe they'll start selling cars. Costco has been in the news a lot for the share of finished vehicle sales they do. They work through a dealership. There's a dealership underneath Costco, but you deal with Costco, and I could see Amazon doing something similar and cutting out the dealership, and eventually the car just driving itself from the distribution point right to the customer. But it's not the strongest species that survive or the largest or the most intelligent, but it's the ones that are most responsive to change. And I think that fits with what we heard from Anu yesterday from Volkswagen in the presentation or the panel on innovation. And I took it to heart and thought it was very, very good. So thank you very much and appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, a great presentation, giving us a guideline or ideas of how the industry is going to change. They're kind of it's strange because they sort of seem very far away, but they're also very near as well. So it's an interesting future that we have in logistics and in finished vehicle logistics. So obviously this is the time for the Q&A, the questions and answers. So if you've got a question, please raise your hand, wait for the microphone to come to you, and then say your name and your company name. And of course, you can use the app, but we do have a preference for questions from the room. So there's a question. Hello. Yeah, a question at the back there. Thank you.
I submitted a question, and Louis didn't read it, so I figure I have to ask it in person this time. So I'm Steve Tripp, I'm from ICL Systems, and this question has to do with the IBM Maersk blockchain initiative. So I would like to know if you can elaborate on how it's like and how it's different from a traditional blockchain that we think of when we think of Bitcoin. So for a couple of examples, one is the entire history of all the transactions maintained in a distributed database, or is it on some central IBM or Maersk platform? That's one question. Another question is the validity of this block of data, is it determined by calculating cryptographic hashtags, or is that the system you use to maintain the integrity? And the third question I would have is, does every participant in this network have public and private cryptographic keys to access the network? And if you could give other ways that's like or different, I'd be interested to know.
Sure. It's a very good question. So the case that I explained, that is on a private blockchain platform just between IBM and Merck. So that all the transaction that get recorded, it's only between these two parties. As you mentioned, the biggest difference between Bitcoin kind of a solution is it is open, right? It is pretty much public. Anybody can get in. You cannot actually, and plus everybody has a pseudo name, so you cannot really track who's behind all those transactions. Whereas in this is a hyperledger based blockchain solution where the participant itself is controlled. So it's only the platform the transaction is visible only between these two players. And then to your other question of even between these two players, they can control of what they want the other side to see. So if there is a shipper and there is a OEM, the OEM can control what are the information that there could be a transaction, there could be a lot of attributes that goes with the transaction, but they can control what the other party can see. So it is fully controlled, and all this information that goes to the ledger and coming out is all crypted. So nobody can, unless somebody can decode it, it is not visually available to anybody to mine the data. I hope I answered the question.
Okay, a question from me is how close is blockchain to really, we've seen an example,
Yeah.
but it's still, we can see a million examples of things that are still very far away from actual reality. How close is blockchain and what's holding it back?
So in terms of the blockchain right now, the biggest interest is wherever there is some level of financial transaction that kind of comes in, right? Because there needs to be a level of trust, and people, say for example, the example that I was talking about, you want to file an insurance claim based on a damage, right? So there is a claim, and there is a people who, there's an amount that is behind it. So that needs to be tightly tracked, and it needs to be processed quickly. So that is the area, as long as there is kind of financial stuff involved, it is progressing pretty well. But it doesn't mean that it cannot be applied in other places. It is the mindset, and there's this, we are in the process of creating some proof of concept and proof of values with most of the automotive and other industries where it's getting traction. The another question is talking about where it is holding back, right? So the real challenges, the only challenges, so if I have like 5 people in that supply chain stream, right, the inbound or outbound logistics, for example, all the 5 player has to be fully onboarded to close the loop, right? If one of them is not onboarded, still that piece is broken. Yeah. I can have all the transactions, but I'm going to have some blocks and pieces where the player who needs to contribute, if it's not contributing, then that is going to be a gap. So getting everybody onboarded is the key. So a lot of players, what they are doing is they're trying to do the blockchain within 4 walls of their organization, and then slowly try to bring the external players in. So that way you can really make it efficient.
Okay. And who will lead on blockchain or getting into blockchain or using it? Is it going to be the problem owner, someone who said, right, this is a problem, can we use blockchain to fix it? Will it be IT or CIOs pushing it down and saying you've got to start using blockchain? Will it be a third party? How will it grow?
Yeah, so in many industries, they are trying to come up with a consortium to enable this platform, because it needs to be a trust based on all this player, right? So they are forming a consortium, and right now the consortium are in the beginning stages pertaining to particular industry. At some point, maybe they can merge together, but because there is some level of funding that is needed, right, to at least to fund this platform or to make this thing running. So mostly, like, if it is a OEM play, any big player who gets the big bucks or benefits is probably going to pay for it. Right now we are mostly after the OEMs who will pay for this funding.
Okay. And the question that came through on the app, and it's not all going to be about blockchain, but this is just initially, is based on the huge resources available to Bitcoin, it can still only process about 7 transactions a minute. How is IBM getting over this scalability issue?
Yeah, so that is why, like, the concept, that the solution that we call it like a hyperledger fabric solution. And even if you go across any banking or any industry, behind the scene, it's all our IBM solution that kind of really running the whole show, which is probably not seen outside. And we have did this transaction. We have used the blockchain in a connected vehicle application as well. So we ran 4 vehicles on a road, and the vehicles have been transmitting data like in a millisecond to IBM, an IoT cloud, and then we had this blockchain which kind of registers all the transaction. So from a scalability standpoint, there is no issue. And another point is, in the hyperledger, it is not a public distributed ledger, right? It is a more private, tightly controlled. So the ledger itself is distributed only within the few parties. So that is a big difference where we could really scale well compared to a Bitcoin kind of a solution.
Okay, thank you. Question for Tim. You gave us a great presentation covering a lot of areas, but one of the things that might be particularly relevant for us is short C for Mexico.
Well, unfortunately, my office, the legislation that enables our office, that authorizes it, is restricted to U.S. trades and U.S.-Canada trade within the Great Lakes. Okay. But I've been talking to several folks here about what's going on with the short sea trade, and it's not impossible that there could be a legislative change that would allow that. If we can't go that far, then perhaps we could at least see what they're doing and see if we can emulate it here.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any questions from the audience? Don't forget it's your session. And again, the usual rules, you know, you're not getting out any earlier if you don't ask a question, because I've got 400 here. A question from the very young gentleman in the middle there.
Thank you.
It's interesting listening to the autonomous future. So the question I have, if we take $6 billion out of the cost of transportation because everything's automated, I think we're going to use most of those funds to support all the people that are not working anymore. So what do you foresee with everything being automated, manufacturing, the driving, the transportation? What is the future of the workforce?
Okay. And just to put in context, that's Charles Franklin from Honda. So anyone want to take that on? Maybe.
I don't have a clear idea of how this is going to go. I think it's a big concern. I think it was interesting. There's a magazine that was put out on the table this morning called Raconteur that has a good article about this in there and the possibility of a robot tax, that sort of thing. I see this starting up mostly in areas where you have shortages of people. Driver shortages right now are a really big concern in the trucking industry, not just for finished vehicle logistics, but for movement of containers and domestic movement of dry vans. I see probably not a complete elimination of drivers. I personally think that getting to fully autonomous vehicles for the first and last mile delivery on public roads, if you see a semi, it has to go in the left lane to make a right turn because of the length of the vehicle, things like that. I think that's a very dangerous move. It's going to be very difficult to automate stuff like that very well. And there's so much more that happens on your local roads with people running across the road, bicyclists, things like that that don't happen on the interstate. I think it'll be a while before, on the transportation side anyway, that you have severe disruptions of people that are unemployed because of autonomous vehicles. I think you're going to see a lot more just a relief of the ability to hire enough employees and things like that to do the long haul stuff, which is the least attractive part of the truckers, in many cases the trucker's job, is sitting in the cab and droning down the interstate highway system for hours on end. They want to be home at night. If you do the first and last mile pickup from an autonomous vehicle, you're going to be home every night, things like that. So I don't see it, at least in the near term, the next 20 years, being a huge issue. But I do think it's something we need to start thinking about in society, no question about it.
Okay. And I guess most of you are too young. Actually, no, you're not.
Actually, on the autonomous vessel, the Maritime Administration basically has two halves. We've got the commercial sector where we work, this is my office, that we work with industry, and we have the defense half. We've got our 46 reserve ships that are maintained, ready to be activated on a 5 to 10 day basis, depending on what their status of readiness is. And ready to support the needs of the military. Currently, we've done some studies, and we've got a mariner shortfall of about 1,800 U.S. mariners. As the U.S. fleet has decreased, I think it's gone down about 25% just in the past few years. We're down to something like 86, don't quote me on that, but somewhere in that number of vessels that are trading internationally. So the shortfall, those ships actually provide the basis of the crews that can be called up for wartime use. So it's just like with trucking, it's a tough sell to a kid that's hooked up to his phone 24 hours a day to say go to sea for 4 months at a time. And when you go to join the maritime service to go see the world, but the ships turn so quickly that you could say you've been to Italy, but you've not been to Italy. You haven't gone anywhere. So it's a tough sell. So the new administration recognizes that, and the Maritime Administrator, Rear Admiral Busby, has created an autonomous vessel working group, and we're looking to see, as he said, we could either get in front of it or get run over by it because it's coming. I don't see a case where, as with trucks, you're going to have a completely pilotless vessel operating, but I think they're going to get very highly automated to the point where a much smaller crew can operate them, and that's how you're going to solve that problem.
And for you, you must, at IBM, you know, one of the things that you guys do is try and automate a whole bunch of things in different sectors. And you must get that question, whether it's from governments or whatever it is. So,
yeah, so see, we have been partnering with some advanced R&D team of some of the OEMs to experiment in this level 4, level 5, because we have a platform called IoT for automotive. There is an IoT specifically for automotive. The key thing about there is, when you want to go to a level 5 kind of an autonomous, you need to have some, the intelligence has been built in multiple places, not just on the vehicle. So there is a level of intelligence that needs to be built in the vehicle, which is evolving fastly. Right now we have a lot of ADAS functionalities, and slowly it will turn into a full-fledged intelligence. But that intelligence alone is not enough for a complete autonomous. We need to build intelligence based on the infrastructure data, right? Like, you know, about the city needs to be ready for it, or the traffic and the entire infrastructure needs to be ready. So that part is where we see is the big gap, right? So yeah, the vehicle may be ready for an autonomous, but the roads may not be ready. And even like, you know, the snow condition they're talking about, the one of the things that we saw from the sensing point is they have the solid state LiDAR, right? But that LiDAR will not work in a foggy or like in a snowy condition. So even from a technology wise, there are still gaps to get to a level 5. We can get close to level 3, level 3.5, 3.7, but to a 4 and 5, yeah, we see it is closer, but there are still some significant gaps in order to completely replace human. So yes, it is evolving, but the city-wise, the infrastructure-wise, we see a big gap. And that is going to be a bottleneck to be a fully autonomous vehicles on the road anytime soon. I also agree that it may be like at least like 15-20 years down the line to get in.
yeah. But as I was saying earlier, you know, despite looking so young, I'm old enough to remember the conversations when computers and internet were coming in place. And the question then was, what are we going to do with all our leisure time? Because everything is going to be automated. I don't know about you guys, but I've never worked so hard or for such long hours because of this stupid thing. So I'm not sure, you know, that we're going to be cutting too many man hours by automating more things. A question again to Jason. You touched upon the rail issue, and that is a huge issue for the automotive industry, finished vehicle logistics industry. I guess you touch all different industries from a rail perspective in your practice. How does rail efficiency for automotive compared to other industries, or do you see, you know, automotive being leaders or laggards, and that they could learn from other industries to make the most of rail?
Well, sadly, I find this to be a very depressing conference at times. The last time I was here, I think, was 3 years ago, and there was a lot of talk about short sea for finished vehicles coming out of Mexico going to the east and west coast. And I thought, oh, well, the rails will wake up and they'll grab that business. But they didn't. It's for most of the vehicles coming out of Mexico going to the east coast of the United States are moving short sea and truck distribution inland from the ports. They're not moving rail. And I think this is a serious problem. The other thing, I saw a presentation by Hyundai that has a plant in Huntsville, Alabama, and it used to be a pretty accepted notion that rail was something, anything over a driver day, you'd put it on a rail car and you'd move it to the distribution centers by rail, because you didn't want to have the expensive auto carrier truck and driver employed for more than one driver day getting the vehicles moved. But they were out to 750 miles and pushing 1,000. And if you look at Huntsville, Alabama, and you draw a radius of 1,000 miles from there, you get to more than 3/4 of the US population, and you don't need rail. I think the rail industry needs a big wake-up call, and they're losing market share to truck on a continuing basis. And I think you see this even more with the loss of coal transportation, which was a huge amount of the ton miles that rail was moving. And that dropped by about 25% since 2014. It's sort of hit a plateau right now because natural gas prices have spiked up and coal is back competitive with natural gas, but it will continue to be a long-term decline for rail. Now, is rail financially hurting because of the loss of coal? No, right now the rails financially are in better shape than they've ever been. Intermodal last week was up 10%, which was huge growth, but I think we're going to run into capacity problems in terminals, the amount of boxes available and the amount of rail cars available to support that kind of ongoing growth. And that ongoing growth is really a result of driver shortages. And if you get some level of autonomy going in where at least part of a truck haul, like the interstate highway portion of it, doesn't need a driver anymore, you're going to see trucks be able to offer faster service because they don't have to have driver rest on the long hauls. And you're going to see much better equipment utilization on the truck side. The tractor's going to be turning 24 hours a day, as are the trailers. They're not going to be sitting in a truck stop while the driver takes a nap or sleeps. I think there's severe threats coming down the line to the long term on rail. We've been pushing that message around the rail industry, but so far with little impact because the rail industry is financially very well off right now.
Okay, thank you. I think there's a question at the back.
Oh, thank you. Randy Denton, Mid-Texas in the Dallas area. I have a question for Jason. If I understood one of your slides right, the projection was that autonomous vehicles would result in a lower demand for public transportation. And I wasn't sure I followed the incentive of somebody already in public transportation to go into an autonomous vehicle. Could you explain the assumptions on that? And also, who would own the autonomous vehicle? Is that going to be owned by Uber or a taxi company, or is that owned by the individual?
Let's deal with the ownership piece first, because I think that's the easiest. I think you're going to see Uber and Lyft. They're in this business right now to improve the utilization of vehicles. And they have every incentive to cut the driver out of it. They'd love to cut the driver out of it. And you read article after article about how the drivers don't really make that much money under Uber and Lyft. So I think you're going to see companies come in and actually own the vehicle and provide the coordination of where the vehicle goes. You'll dial it up on your phone just like you do with Uber and Lyft. Will Uber and Lyft be the only two? Probably not. Ford, I think, is talking about getting into that business. I think Google may try it, Tesla may try it. There's a lot of different options there, but I think the ownership will be in a separate company. It won't be a private person. It'll be a company that owns these fleets of vehicles and controls the dispatching and all that of them through their software. Why would people shift from public transportation to Uber? I can tell you personally, my colleagues, we used to do a lot of car rental. We'd get to an airport, we'd rent a car, drive to the client site. It was easier than trying to deal with taxis and phone a taxi, wait 15, 20 minutes, particularly going back to the airport. Almost all my colleagues now get on Uber or Lyft. They book a ride from the airport. They tell Uber and Lyft when they're going to be in approximately. There's a waiting area in most airports now specifically for Uber and Lyft. And you go straight to the client site. It's like having your own private chauffeured vehicle, but it's way more convenient and way faster than a taxi because you don't have to queue up in line waiting to get on the taxi. And particularly going back to the airport, you don't have a 15, 20-minute wait once you call the cab for it to show up and take you. So that's what they're seeing in New York City with Uber and Lyft. You're seeing people get out of buses, off the subway. You have to get to the subway, so maybe you're taking a taxi to the subway now. It's going to be a lot more convenient just to get in the Uber or Lyft car and have it take you to destination like a private car service. So it'll be a lot more convenient for people than current public transportation and a single seat ride to where you're going. That said, in places like New York where infrastructure is at such a premium with bridges and tunnels and things like that, I don't know that the infrastructure will expand significantly. The example I gave about Atlanta with the interstate highway through the middle of downtown Atlanta, I don't see them expanding that a whole lot more. So will there still be, I think for fixed guideway systems, I think there will still be potential requirement of use because congestion will just get so bad it won't be faster to take an Uber or a Lyft car. But I think that'll be the dividing point is when you get so many people abandoning public transportation and the congestion delays start to make it more painful than going back to public transportation, you'll see it balance out. But I think that's what will end up happening.
Just to add to his first point in terms of who owns the autonomous vehicle, If you look at the OEMs are seeing even Uber and Lyft as a competitor. They are trying to get themselves ahead of the game. So even in the current situation, they are trying to sell ride as a service. So that is the move that they are positioning themselves now. Right now, instead of saying you can lease it, you can package the whole thing. You can get all the service, insurance, everything comes as a one package now. The next move is to sell that as like instead of like a month, just you pay as you use, like like in a time bounded. And once the autonomous comes in, then the vehicle will be on your doorsteps when you need. Right now, you need to go pick it up, but once autonomous in place, the model will be there. Just the mechanics of how you get the vehicle will be even more smooth. So that's where they're getting.
Okay, thank you. Fortunately, we've run out of time, and there's a great question on here for you, Tim, so I would encourage you to get together, but we haven't got time to ask it in the session now. But firstly, I'd like to thank the panel for a very interesting session. Thank you very much. And just a quick reminder about the photographs from the Gulf and the whale watching, the evaluation forms if you're leaving now, the equipment showcase across the road, which is available where you can go now or in the lunch break, or we will be doing it at the end of the day. But otherwise, back in this room at 11 o'clock for Rethinking Finished Vehicle Logistics Networks, and join us for coffee hosted by Driver. Thank you.